This is the Personal Reflections video for Part C of our pilot episode, The Nature of Threat, for Star Trek Adventures First Response campaign. Now, I like to record these as soon after play as I can, before I can, spend any time thinking about what I'm going to say, so that it can be a true, first impression of the session. But I wasn't able to do that this time. It's more than 5 hours after we've played, so I've had time to think about things. So this particular session, again, went by pretty quickly. Play seems to be around 90 minutes, but I'm hoping that with schedule changes for me and for Joseph that are coming up starting next week, that maybe play can be closer to the 2 hour, or maybe over 2 hour mark. That would be kind of nice. So the way things have been going, some of the time is being used for setup, more time than we'll need later. But I'm arriving home from work after we're supposed to have started to play, and then have to throw myself into play, which I've mentioned before, which is not ideal. This session dealt mostly with the crisis and from two perspectives, which I enjoyed. So we had the view from the Avicenna, wondering what's going on the planet and having some difficulty communicating, wondering what happened to the Potemkin, right? Wondering what's going to happen next, and some lack of important information that the bridge crew was operating under, such as not everybody was back on board after the beam ups. Plus, we had the particle wave, or the wave of particles situation, and what that entailed. So, which was an interesting crisis to face, and to do so in the role of secondary characters rather than main characters. So lots of interesting stuff came up. We didn't have to deal with new mechanics, really, or new mechanisms, so that was nice. Most of what we could do was focus on just playing. Now, we are still at the point where we don't know each other very well as players, even though we have familiarity with each other as people, or at least I have familiarity with everybody as people, and they each have familiarity with me. They don't have familiarity with each other yet. So what this means is that there's kind of a constant shifting. Now, some of this I'm doing intentionally. So when you're watching, you'll see different types of techniques. Like early on, we talked about camera angles. That's kind of drifted by the wayside. In this particular episode, I say directly, this is a cut scene. You don't have to take a character in this scene. I said that flat out, which is not really my way. And it was well received, and I shared that scene with them because this is information that their characters would have, and it's that their characters would be operating from as a matter of course, and would be part of a televised episode, and helps establish things that we would intuitively know about the characters that are involved, and this sort of thing. So it was important to do, and it was important that it be very short and have a point. Now, normally I wouldn't announce it. I would just start describing, and people would listen to the description, and then we would move on, and I'd set up the next scene. But that's the sort of thing you do when you are used to each other, when you have built a group culture of play for this game, at this table, at this time, with these people. So there was a lot of awkwardness I felt in myself this time. This is my personal reflection, so mostly the focus is on me. So there were three situations. There was the beam up from the planet of the captain. There was the cutscene, and there was a flashback. So the cutscene I handled directly, player to player, on an out of game, right, level. It was an explanation. This is why I'm using this game technique to do this game thing. Now, removing Joseph's main character from active focus in this episode and putting him into the background was important to me. It might not have been important to other people playing the game. They might have made a variety of other decisions and implemented them in different ways. But these were the decisions that I made because it's tied into preference and my understanding of the nature of a main character. So I needed at the beginning of play to handle this situation with this main character. And I started out doing it the way I normally do it, which is to just set it up with description. So it becomes obvious to everybody what's going to happen, and we don't need to talk about it. But I realized partway through, and this is why it seems awkward to me, that that was inappropriate, and I really needed to explain what I was doing so that it was clear why the character was the one chosen to beam out while the other two were left behind to wait for the next round of beam-ups. So that in subsequent scenes, we didn't keep trying to bring the captain in, which would completely negate the purpose of going through the motions of, putting the character out of focus. I was ready to bring the character into focus at any point that it was necessary. But we got lucky, and I didn't have to do that. So that was nice. Nice for me. Anyway, so with the cutscene, I did it all player to player, person to person, and it worked really well. Although this is not my preference. And with the beaming the captain not only away from immediate danger, but beaming the captain away from active focus in that session, I did it half and half, which is awkward, right? I went with habit, recognized habit, put the brakes on, and switched to this other methodology. Clumsy, right? Not something I'm going to enjoy watching. And then, later on, there is a flashback. And there's lots of different ways to handle flashbacks, such as putting everything entirely in the hands of the player and saying, okay, this is a memory from long, long ago. Tell us. It's now relevant, right? This is something that the character's thinking, right? Yeah, sir. And then we share this thing. This was not that. But I never said that. If I were with a group who is used to my shenanigans, then I would have started to describe things, and they would have recognized it as a normal scene and would have acted normally. The only difference is that they would recognize that the scene was set in the past. So I should have said, this is a flashback scene. It's a normal scene in every respect. This is where you are, and give the description of the situation. But I didn't. I just started describing the situation. So this caused confusion in the player, who fortunately, Ron said, am I doing what you expect, kind of thing. And so then I could explain, this is just a flashback scene. And we kind of rushed through the rest of it because that's what we did. But now that it's over, I get to reflect on, once again, the power of habit. This is something I talk about on the channel fairly often. And so now here's an example of that powerful force of habit affecting my play. So it's good for me to see it and experience it and be able to share it, as much as I'm not going to enjoy watching it. But there it is. So does that mean next time and for every time after that, I will approach all of these techniques with a preface as a player to another player saying, this is a cutscene, or this is a flashback? I certainly don't want to do that. It's my preference for a reason. That habit developed for a reason. So this will be one of the things that players will be learning about me, and I can facilitate that process of them learning my cues and triggers as we go, and it can be a positive thing rather than a frustrating thing. The cutscene, I simply flat out announced, this is a cutscene, you don't need to do anything, right? And everyone could recognize immediately why the cutscene was being put in there, why time was being used for it, and it was short. So, 1 out of the 3 times, I chose the right methodology for the situation. So I find that interesting and worth reflecting on. But when thinking about habit, I started thinking about something I talked about in an earlier video. And there's so many videos, I'm not really sure which video it was, which is the notion of when learning a new game, right? Which is, you know, kind of like a climb up toward competency. There can be the feeling of like of a law of diminishing returns or something, of how long are we going to keep trying to improve at the game before we just kind of play the game, before we, you know, settle on the okay plateau. This is a phrase I picked up at a former workplace, the okay plateau, where your skills and the outcome from your skills they're okay. From your perspective, maybe they're good enough. From someone else's perspective, they might be a little less than satisfying. And for someone else's perspective, it might be a little bit more than we want to do. But anyway, it's okay. It all, you know, the sum total of it's okay. I don't think this group is the sort of group that settles for the okay plateau. But when I hear people talk about Star Trek Adventures, this is something I wonder about a lot. This is the type of game, I think, that falls prey to a pretty mechanistic approach to play, where there's so much to say about all the different options for all the different moving parts in the system, that the effort, right, the playful, fun effort, but the effort nonetheless of internalizing that system so that you can speak about it differently, so that it moves faster. And, you know, it may seem counterintuitive, but Star Trek Adventures is actually a really fast playing game. That effort may seem like more than we want to make. So if we can just get okay, and it's fun, then that's great. So internalizing the procedures and allowing for people to recognize what you're talking about from a character perspective or from a descriptive methodology, rather than saying, I'd like to use my talent and spend one momentum, right? Because there's ways that we can approach this, right? We can state an intention. You know, I'd like to try and figure out what this alien probe, you know, is doing. You know, imagine that that Nomad were on your ship, you know, from the original series episode, and you're trying to figure out what it does or what it is, right? You've got this long extended task. We could say, you know, this is an extended task and you need to generate this much work, and this is the resistance, and then the players break out the dice and they roll the dice and say, oh, I generated this much work and I'd like to spend this momentum to have this effect, and oh, I rolled these effects, and so that applies this way, and then okay, so you learn blah, right? We could actually bypass any of the role playing and description of action and, you know, montage stuff that might be relevant. We just bypass all of that, and all we did was talk about the dice as dice rather than the dice as the metaphor for the problem. Right? That's a part of the OK plateau. So, like I said, I don't think that this is a group that's prone to camping on the OK plateau. But these short play times and the nature of the game itself definitely have that effect in Star Trek Adventures groups that are out there, and certainly lends the appearance of that effect to observers who aren't playing. Right? They look at the text and they go, wow, this is a heavy system, or wow, there's lots of options, and so therefore I can't possibly roleplay in it. So one of my hopes is that through the process of play, if people stick with watching the actual plays, which is another hope altogether, that they will see the process of the conversation shifting from really a lot of talk about system, which leads to a lot of talk about the characters, transforming over time into the disappearance of the explicit teaching talk about the system, and then the explicit talk, confirming that, I got it right about the system, to more comfortable use of the system, and see that continue to evolve through the series until it fades into being a functional part of description rather than named part of system interacting with named part of system, roll dice, say number, move on. Right. So I'm hoping that the series can last so long. I'm hoping that we'll see the language and the conversation change in that way, and that all of that will be fun, and that someone who can benefit from it will see it. That's a lot. That's an awful lot of hopes, but perhaps I'm an optimist. All right, so where we left off in Part C, there obviously needs to be a Part D, but we are in that place in play that feels like the end is in sight, right? Ensign Yang and Lieutenant Korsakov are making plans to get the people off the planet, and they have a functional plan. They have an idea of how it's going to be carried out. So in Part D, I imagine they or other characters aboard the Avicenna will try to carry that out, and the dice and their plan will interact, and we'll see who lives and who dies. There is, of course, a timing thing going on, and the relative high level of success that the rolls have provided to the characters has meant that we're moving along at a pretty quick pace. But the flip side of that is what Ron mentioned in his recap in Part C, is there's a whole laundry list of things that the crew has not done. They've not investigated the Potemkin. They have not surveyed the planet, really. They've surveyed it in a very focused sense on the outpost, but not, we don't know if there's a crewman somewhere operating a powerful sensor, scanning the geology and activity of the planet. But in the original series, of course, we see many, many times members of the crew pop up and either respond to Kirk's order with "already done, sir," because they're a highly trained crew, and that's shorthand, the writing shorthand for how the crew demonstrates they're highly trained, is that they can anticipate the orders and requirements of the captain. So could be we'll have the acting captain stride onto the bridge at some point from sickbay and say, I want a survey of this, that, and the other thing, and we can represent it. We can represent that through secondary characters as "already done, sir. Here you go." And then if he wants more information that's presented from the secondary characters, then, our players can delve into that material themselves. So that's kind of cool. The idea that there's hundreds of people on the ship, or 180 in this particular case on the ship, all of whom have these different tasks and abilities. And so not everything needs to be done by the main characters. So it's conceivable, although it's not something I have any lingering attachment to, that Part D will be that final session. If we can play a little longer, I think it's likely, right? Their mission is to save the people. Their mission isn't to solve the crisis. Their mission isn't to stop the earthquakes or any of these things. Their mission is to rescue the people. So once they've accomplished that, or once they have failed horribly at that, the episode is over. And the aftermath of the episode can go into informing the cool details of the setting and the situation of episode 1. Or the next episode, or the complete redoing of the pilot, because the original series had 2 pilots. So anyway, pretty positive about the session. Little sad that it got clumsy in parts. And one thing that is a part of my enjoyment of play as a thing is that we can get better at it, right? That's something that you've probably heard me say a lot if you've been to the channel before. We can get better at this thing that we enjoy. We can get better at a particular game that we're playing right now. We can get better globally at a particular system that applies to many games, and which enables us to more quickly pick that game up again when we return to it. And these are all skills. This is a skill-based consideration. We can develop particular techniques that do particular things, such as, being willing to do flashbacks, being willing to set up mysteries, and having different tools for doing mysteries in different ways, or investigations, or explorations of a site, or whatever. Political interactions. How do we portray multiple characters in a scene? There are techniques and skills for this, right? Of varying degrees of difficulty. And there's also artfulness, the way that you implement the skills. And every time I get together with a new group, I find I want to be able to draw on the artfulness, and it usually falters and fails. And so, that's one of those things that you don't give up on. You don't say, "Ooh, I'm just going to, play it safe." You keep going for the next level of what you're capable of, because then what you're capable of decreases if you're not. So at some point, I hope to regain the artfulness that I enjoyed with Star Trek Adventures the last time I played it with this new group of people. And I hope that my level of skill with the system returns quickly. And I hope that through our interactions as a group, our group's facility with the system develops quickly and enjoyably. And that we all continue to enjoy this in a compatible way. So these are my reflections at some terrible hour after playing Part C. I'm looking forward very much to Part D, the return of Joseph as the active captain, or the acting captain, and to see what exactly is the plan that Korsakov and Yang are developing, and how well they can carry it out, and if they'll be able to do that before, disaster strikes. Okay. Take care.